Hello, everyone, and welcome to another video. In this video, we are going to do the JavaScript side of the MySQL. Last video, I showed you how to set it up, some information about MySQL, MySQL Workbench, and some sample statements. Um, and then this video, we're going to do the JavaScript coding part. And we're going to just program some routes that you can access to do certain statements as an example, and you guys can expand on this later. One thing I want to clear up is that I use this alias for columns in the last video and it didn't work. I made a mistake. You can use aliases, but you can only use them in certain parts in the select statements and other things as well. You cannot use them on clauses or where clauses or what's called having clauses. That's because when those clauses are built during the SQL pipeline, these are not really referenced or built yet, so you can't really use them. So that's why it didn't work. On the on clauses, you're going to have to do uh, the full expression. The alias for the tables works just fine. You just can't use it for the on expression as a column. You cannot use the column aliases. The table ones are just fine. Okay. But that was a mistake I made is you cannot use the aliases for columns, whereas on and having clauses. Okay. Uh, so if we had to have a where here, I had to do u.id. I can't do uid equals p dot foreign key ID. Okay? I have to use the full expression. Okay, but enough of that. In the JavaScript, at least in your guys' app, you guys have your basic setup here. We are going to need to first install our node module, right, for MySQL. So we're going to install npm install MySQL. This one, if you do this one, we're gonna do MySQL too. If you do this one, this is like an older version. It will cause some issues with passwords and stuff like that. If you use this version, make sure the user password in the database is set to standard and not the caching one. So, for instance, if you go to the workbench, you go to users, you click the users. This has to be set to standard, and these ones are cached. But if I make a new user, it's got to be set to standard for the MySQL package to work. If you don't, what happens is every time you try to connect, you're going to get a MySQL error saying that the client does not support the authentication method. Please update your client, which means you must update this package you just installed, which unless you go do some open source work, it's not going to happen. So I'm going to use this to avoid as much problems as possible. Though there are some subtle differences we're going to have to fight with this as well. But nonetheless, we're going to use it. So we're going to install it. And since I didn't mess up, I actually installed. Look at our package.json now. Let me get rid of this little star script here. We see MySQL2 is installed. Okay. I do encourage you guys to go to the MySQL2 npm page and look at the API. I'm going to use some of them in here, but it will help to kind of get an idea of what's going on. Kind of the first query, prepare statements, connecting, connection pools, which I'm going to use, which basically creates all my connect. It doesn't create all my connections, but allows me to pull connections on the fly as I need it, and I can also set a connection limit as well. But it shows you how to write statements. We use promises. I know we haven't talked about JavaScript yet, but I know a lot of students are wanting to start the term project. So I'm going to do MySQL first. Then we'll talk about JavaScript second, but kind of gives you a good idea of what's going on. So I encourage you guys to read this, and I always reference this when I use this module uh, going forward. So I recommend you guys at least read this or go through this a couple times, kind of go see what's going on. You don't really need to do this until you start working with your database, but nonetheless, you want to go through this. Okay. As you Google MySQL2 npm, and it came up. Okay. So we have our MySQL driver installed. And my driver is basically this is what's going to allow me to connect with my database and run SQL statements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new folder. And we're going to call it new file, new folder, conf, right? I'm just going to store my database config file. In here, we're just going to make a new file called database.js. And in here, all I'm going to do is create the pool for my connection, okay? So what I must first do is I must import or require the MySQL package. Okay, this will load this module into my Node application. So I will use the MySQL to reference this mysql2 package. And then what I'm going to do now is create a pool of connections with a new variable called const pool. All const means that this is a constant value. It doesn't mean I can't change the object that pool references. I just can't change what pool references to, right? So if I had an object and let's say I had like an ID equals some value, I can change the value of ID. I just can't change I cannot reassign pool to something different. So when it comes to at least the constant values and the things they are assigned to, if they're just regular primitive values like const, x equals 6, then obviously you can't change it because you can't change what this is referenced to. But for an object, the only thing that's constant and disallowed is the reassigning of pool, but you can definitely do pool.id equals some other stuff, right? It'll be fine. Okay, you just can't do pool equals some new object like this. Right? It will not be allowed. Okay? That's what we're doing. We're just saying I can't reassign pool. So I'm going to make a new connection pool, and we're going to do two different pools. I'm going to leave one off, and then we're going to jump to it in a second. So I'm going to do mysql.create. Let's forget the L. Pool. Okay. And in here, it's going to take a configuration object. Okay. In this configuration object, we're going to specify the host, some double quotes, the user, the person we're going to log in with. This is actually going to be the photo path user that I made when I configured my database. My password for my user. The database I want to connect to, not the MySQL server itself, but the database inside the server. And then I'm going to set a connection limit to 50. Obviously, in a production server, it won't be 50. We're going to have at most 50 connections at the same time. We're going to wait for a connection. So if there's not one available, we're going to pause and wait for one to become available. You don't really need to set this, to be honest. Then debug false. It is false by default, but you can we'll leave the key limit off. Set to true. Now, this one comes in handy. If you guys have trouble, I recommend you setting it to true. However, this does dump a lot of information to the console, so you're going to have to dig through it and kind of see what's going on. But if you have errors in your statements and you can't understand what this being spit out from console.log statements, flip this to true. And maybe if we have time in, I'll show it to you. And this will tell you everything you need to know and then some. Okay. So I'm going to leave it as false for now so we don't get crazy. Okay. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to export this pool out of my module. So basically, I have a database module. Now, if anybody imports this file in their file, so like say if I import it to app.js, it's actually going to export this pool. Okay, and that's what we're going to do in a second. Okay, so what I'm going to make are a bunch of test routes, so we can kind of play with the database and interact with it. So we're going to interact, and then I'll explain the rest of this module exports because it makes more sense when I actually have a file. So we're going to do db test.js. Okay, and then in here I'm going to do const express equals require express. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I need the express app. And then what I need from here, if you look in this one, I should just steal this because I type it out loud. So I need the express module because in there I need to create the router from the express module. And what this allows me to do is to define a bunch of get, post routes, and things like that, like we saw in the starter code. So this router.get and stuff like that. This allows me to find kind of modular routers for different parts of my application. So I'm going to define a very secluded kind of DB test router so it doesn't affect the rest of my app. Okay, and then I'm also going to be, we can make these constant if you like, we're not going to assign them. It could be vars, doesn't really too much. Then I'm going to import my database. So I'm going to do db, since I have OCD, we'll do this, require I knew how to spell. I had OCD for spelling. And then I need to import this database file, right? And we're gonna have a direct link to it via pathing. So I just can't type database .js. I need to give a path to that file. So we're gonna do .conf slash database. I do not need to put the extension because Node already knows it for me. Okay. So import the Express module. We're going to create a new router from the Express module. We're going to add our route functions to this router object. And then at the end, what we're going to do is we're going to export, module that export these routers so that we use them in app.js, okay? But what this module.export does, and from the example, is that we're going to expose this pool to anybody who imports our file or requires it. So when we do const db equals require this file, I'm actually getting a reference to this this pool object. Okay. Now, if I had a collection of functions, then I would have a reference to all those functions that were exported, right? And then there'll be examples later, so we can kind of see it later. And then later you'll see this kind of different syntax of importing things where we'll import, say router from Express, which would be a different way of importing things. Instead, what this will do is instead of importing the entire module Express, we're just going to import the router and that's it. Okay. Um, but we're not going to worry about this now. We'll cover this a little later. We'll stick with the simple require statements. But this is a different way of importing. These are called name imports. If you guys like to use it, you guys can. Yeah, but I'm not going to. Okay. So when I require this database, I'm basically exposing, at least getting this pool object to my database class. Okay. So to write some statements, I'm going to wrap them in little router functions so we can use them. Okay. So we're going to start very simple, and I'm going to do router.get. We're going to do a path. We're going to do get all users. Not the best thing you should do for your database, but we're going to do it. We're going to do a little table dump. So we're going to do request, response, then next. And then we're going to do an arrow function. If you don't know arrow functions, okay, or any functions. This is equivalent to doing this, and then putting the word function here, just an anonymous function. I just don't want to type all that, so I'm just going to do the fat arrow functions because it sounds funny too. So our little function. So remember for starter code, what this says is that if we have a URL that matches this path, we will execute this function. Okay. Now before we can use this function, we have to tell our Node app to actually use these routes. So we'll go to app.js. I'm going to copy and paste this statement here, and then we will do /db test. We're going to import the router into app.js, which basically is going to expose all the routers we have in here. We're going to add quite 3 or 4 more to it. So we'll do that. But then I need to add it to a middleware function. We'll do app.use. We'll do db test. So only URLs that have db test in it will actually go to this. Did I give it a name or did I call it user router? I sure did. We'll call this db router. Now, in your guys' application, you're not going to do a db router. You're going to have this structure a little different. I'm just doing it this way because I don't have a full-fledged app. I just want to show you a quick way of running these SQL statements. And then you guys can easily morph it into your application when you have more logic going on. Okay. So we do console.log. Just have some fun. Actually, we'll do res.send. And then we'll just send getting all posts. But we're not going to actually do anything. If you do console.log and you don't do anything with the response, by the way, your Node app is actually going to hang. So make sure that you always end the response or in the request. So we'll do npm start just to test this, see if this works. I broke something here. Was it package.json? npm start, unexpected, and then, yeah, I broke my package.json, I think. Yeah. It's tricky little commas, always in the weird spot. Uh-oh. So invalid configures pass object, wait for connection. This is going a warning. I'll remember with that. But what I didn't do, and I forgot to fill the information here. So let's fill this in before we go forward. So the host is going to be localhost because it's on the same server. The user is going to be photo app. I think the crazy password I put was 373 CSC 310102 bang. The database can be CSC 317 DB. And then the connection limit. I'll get rid of this. Get rid of the warning too. But yeah, okay. It's gonna complain because I don't have a capital A, but that's okay. So let's try to rerun this because I'm not paying attention when I'm doing this. What's the error for app.use requires middleware function? And what did I give it? This is in. Oh, I want to look there. Where's this in? This is in. Oh, I didn't even give it a router. That's why. So the quick way to find these errors, if you highlight this, you actually can jump to the code and column. So the issue is that these use functions expect kind of a middleware function for here. Since I didn't give it anything, it's going to complain. I want to give it the DB router. Uh, um, so let me get a DB router because I'm not paying attention when I'm doing this for some reason. All right, and make sure this is all okay. Exports plural. Don't use this because it's going to break as well. So yeah, okay. All right, cool. We don't have too much craziness going on, so we can use it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this through curl because it's fun. So we do curl -x. You don't have to do the -x. It's curl can actually figure most of this out for you. Local host 3000. Okay, and that gives us the home page. Whoops, I should take that off. If you guys can't see the other side of my monitor. So that's the home page. Now, if you look at the app.js, if I have a DB test in the path, it's going to be sent to the DB router. So we go to DB router, which is going to be DB test. And then if I have this in the path, then it'll be there. Then it'll execute this function. So what we're going to do is we're going to do DB test and slash, and then I get error. Can't get this because I don't have a root path existing. So that's what we have right there. I didn't expect this to work. I just want to show you that how that path is added. Now we'll do get all users. And he says getting all users. So now you can see that this function is actually executed. So now what we're going to want to do is we're actually going to want to run some SQL statements. Okay, so we'll close this for a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a statement. So there are two types of ways you can run a statement. There's dot. You can use when you use this DB reference, you're going to be referencing the pool in here. There are two functions that are attached to this pool. You have db.query and then db.execute. Okay, they both run a query. However, if you do db.execute, this is what's called a prepared statement, which means if you run the same query multiple times, it's going to be cached and it's going to be a little faster. Okay, if you do a db.query, it's a new query every time. Which one to use is up to you. I'm just going to use db query for now, so we can do some stuff. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just retrieve all of our posts from our database, or all of our users. Sorry. So we'll do select star from users. Okay. Now, when this query completes, it's going to execute what's called a callback, which means this is going to be asynchronous, which means it's not going to execute in a single file fashion. You're going to give this function to an event loop. It's going to be ran sometimes later. When this event is done, you're going to trigger a certain function. Okay. Now, this function is what you'll just basically this callback right here, not the values, but we're going to skip this values here. The CB, which is a callback that's going to be executed when the query is done. So the three parameters for this is error, results, and fields. Right? And fields are just going to be the column names, information about the columns. Okay. Then what we can do is we can do console.log results, and then we'll do res.send results, right? And what this will do is actually this will print the results to the console here. And also I want to see the results over here as well. And if I didn't make any mistake, I should be able to rerun this. Okay, everything's okay. And if I didn't make a mistake writing the JavaScript, I should see results all over the place. Okay. And now what we have here is we have all the users being given back to the front end. It's an array of objects. Now it's a little prettier in the nose part, but that's okay. And this is basically what we have is all the rows in our database that we created, test 13, test 14, stuff like that. So we just fetched all the users in our database, right? The console.log will print it to the terminal that ran the node app. Res.send will send it to whoever makes the request. Now I'm using curl to make the request because it's nice to test it headless. I don't need to use the browser. You can use a browser if you like. So we'll copy this. We'll see what we get in Brave. This is what we get, right? And basically, what you see is all the information about the users. Now, what you'll do in your front end is you'll write some JavaScript that will parse this array of objects, turn it into a nice little post. You'll display it with all your HTML, CSS, and it'll look pretty. I'm not going to show that in this video, but there is an example of this on Island, I believe. It doesn't use the local host; it uses the Giphy API. But nonetheless, you can kind of see this. But this just shows you how you can fetch all the rows in JavaScript. Okay, and we see the same thing with curl as well. Okay, check this now. And we can do the same thing for get posts. Right, get all posts. And then we'll change this to posts. Right? And we won't change anything else. So we're still going to fetch all the same results. Okay, we bring up back up my curl. We'll change this to posts. And nothing works because when you change your JavaScript, you got to reset Node because Node npm by default doesn't check it. You can run like nodemon or nodedaemon pm2 to automatically run your application if you like. But we're going to do this, do it manually. Then we'll come back to curl and we see all of our posts. You come to your browser and type get all posts. You see all of our posts, and then it does another language, but that's okay. But here you see all the information about posts. How small way to be. Yeah, it all doesn't fit on one line, but that's okay. This is all the information from our database, and this is in our front end right here, um, in our browser. Okay, there's no styling because we're returning a bunch of text, so the browser is just going to show a bunch of text. You could write some HTML that does this as well, right? For instance, I can do. Let's see if this works. Let's have some fun. This is where you write stuff, kind of winging it, and then it all fails on you. So let's see if I can do this. So we can do fetch URL dot then some data. Whoops. And this will be the JSON data we get back. We do return. We'll do data dot JSON to turn into a JSON object. Then JSON data. Let's see if this works. I'm winging it here, so hopefully this works. Log JSON data. Now we gotta match all these freaking parentheses. So I'm missing one now. So this one should have two. That one's closed. That one closes that one. That one should close that one. And then this one should close the one for fetch. Actually, I'll do one for fetch all. Right? And this is what I get. Is I get all the results from my front end. Okay. Now the fetch API, if you guys don't know it, it's okay. It is used to fetch data from a server. You will give it a URL to fetch data from, and then it'll give you back some data. We will turn the data into a JSON object because you won't get back any usable data. At least it'll be readable, but you won't be able to use it in the way you want to. Then we're going to convert it to JSON data, And I don't need to put a return statement because I have one line of code and no curly braces. If you put a curly braces, you have to put a return statement. And then with this JSON data, I'm just going to print it out, right? And this is what I have, okay? And this basically is called a promise. This it's not called a promise. It uses promises. It's pending because it's not fulfilled yet. We'll talk about this more later. And this is what we have, right? And then in the front end, you can do all fancy work of styling this all together, right? But the fetch is what you guys will use in your front end code if you want to. You can use Axios, but you got to require Axios. You can also use var XHR, was new XML. You can use this object. It's a little trickier to set up and a little annoying. I'm not going to show it right now. There is an example on iLearn though for the sample code I have posted. But fetch is more than enough. Okay. So at least I know I can fetch my data in a browser. So this is not done with curl. This is not done with backend code. This is actually from Brave, which is a browser on top of Chrome. Right? So I can fetch some data. Okay. You can fetch it here. And I go fetch it through curl. Okay, which is command tool. Okay, so we're just fetching data from our app. So let me go back to my thing. Okay. So this is a basic way of writing these queries. Now, what I'm going to do is if you don't like running it this way, there's a way of doing it with promises. Okay. But what you're going to have to do first is you're going to have to do const. Where was that? Const promise pool equals pool dot promise. Now, this is if you want to use promises. When we learn promises, you may want to use it because it's for me, it's a better way of organizing my thoughts as I step through queries, especially if you got to chain together. We'll export the promise pool. Okay. Now, I think the good news is that the query still should work just as usual, given that the parameters you give it, it'll still be fine, so you don't have to change any code. But I'm going to change one of mine just to show an example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this get all post and I'm going to write it a different way. We'll do get all posts p. Okay. Now, when I do my statement, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to basically chop all this off. Okay. And I have this. Now, with promises, you basically have two states. You have resolved or reject. Resolved means the promise was fulfilled and you have a good case. Reject means the promise, something went wrong and the promise was rejected. Now, when you have a resolved case, you're going to call function on the promise. And when you run db.query, it returns a promise. Would you dot then and then some data. Now, the weird thing is the way this returns data, it's an array of data. So if you do results and fields, as we did before, it's going to be kind of weird because to access this, you're going to have to do result 0, and this is going to be undefined. Or this will be undefined, and this will be result 0. So what's going to look like is it's going to look like this, okay? This is called destructuring, which basically gives names to array values. So for instance, if you do like const x comma y, and then you do 1, 2, you're going to assign x to 1 and y to 2 together, right? So you can do stuff like this, okay? You can do anything with objects as well, but it's called deconstructing, okay? So once we do this, we're going to have a little function that's going to run, okay? And we'll do the same kind of thing. We'll just do console.log results, okay? And if nothing fails, everything's okay. Whoops. I did mean start, sorry. So we'll come to our terminal, we'll run our curl command, and we'll get all post p, and we still get the same results. However, the code is written a little different. So we run our query. When it's done, we then do something with the results. Okay, and then what you can do, which is kind of cool, is you can actually chain these together. Where you can do, okay, maybe I want to run a create statement and then an insert statement or whatever. You can do dot then, but you got to return some stuff. So for instance, let's return. Well, I can't do this here. So what we'll return is we'll just console.log the statements all together. But we'll return, db.query, let's say select star from post where ID is equal to 2. Right? We'll just grab the second one we have. Keep it cool. Make these all capitalized like SQL expects. So we'll select from here and we'll return this. Okay. Then what happens is that since these db.queries return what called promises, we're going to return this to our next function, and you can do another dot then. You know how to spell, right? And then here we'll do our function, and then we'll do content.log results. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to res send the second one, not the first one, right? And then what we'll do is we'll do results fields, right? And then we'll do this. Okay. So what's happening is we're actually chaining two statements together. We'll run the first one, we'll print its results, then we'll run the second one, but we'll return it. So this one returns a promise, and then once this query is complete, this second one here, we'll execute this then function, and then we'll run this results. Okay. Now, in order for you to chain two then functions together, you always have to return a promise. So if this doesn't return a promise, this function is going to get kind of ruined. Okay. So in order to do multiple thens back to back, the last thing you must do is return a promise. Okay. So let's see what happens when I run this. No mistakes. We'll come back to curl because I like curl. And what I get back is one post with ID 2. Okay. But I did not get back all the posts. I just get back the one I want. Okay. Now, this is not the best thing to do. It's kind of pointless, but I just want to show you guys can chain them together. Okay. So we'll get rid of this and this, and we'll end it. Okay. Now, one thing to keep in mind when writing these, well, actually, no, we'll talk about that in a second. What I want to write one now is, let's do a post run, right? So we've seen retrieving data, which is easy. So we'll do posts, right? And then we'll say, I'll do a create user. Why not? Give you guys some help. Capital U, individual. And then what we'll take a request object, a response object, and the next middleware function if we have it, which we don't, but we'll give it there. Java stuff. And now in here, I'm going to make a new user. Okay. Now, this gets a little tricky because I'm going to be accepting data from the front end. Now, in this request object, at least when you guys do your form data, there are a few things. You have query, body, params, and URL. If you do .params, this is data that's being sent in the URL itself. Okay. The body will also be the same thing, but this will be where you put your form data. If your content type is like, the header is content type, X www form URL encoded. This will be basically we'll take your form and put all the data in the body parameter. Okay. We'll have to talk about this more in a little later when we talk about sending data to the server from the front. But ultimately, when you guys do your forms, when you write your HTML, you're going to have to kind of add some attributes to the form for it to work correctly. For instance, when you have your input fields, you have your ID, say password, right? And then, this if you want. When this is if this is in a form tag, okay, say form, get a little sidetracked here, but it's okay. When you submit a form via the action parameter and method, right? So we'll do method equals post. This isn't going to work, but I just want to show you how this is going to receive data from the front end. And then this will be, can't type method db test create user. Okay. So what happens is when you guys submit your form, this is going to send all the data to this route on your backend. The other part of the route or the other part of the URL is already assumed. So localhost 3000 doesn't need to be typed because it's already put there for you. Okay. So what this is going to do is when you submit the form, you'll send data to the server at this route with the method post. Okay. Now, in order for you to access the data, you'll need to add the name attribute. So for instance, it's to password. Okay. Then on the server, you could do you can use request.body.password, right? And you can access the value from this field that's being sent to the server. If you don't have this parameter, this will be returned undefined. Okay, so you cannot use the ID attribute. You will use the name attribute for this. So it'll be password, right? And then you'll have one for uh, username. I know there's no types, but we don't need the types, right? And then you'll have one for email. Okay, so when you guys start doing your front end and your back end kind of connections, you'll need to add these name attributes to your forms. That way, when you do your submits, input ID a button type equals submit. When your form is submitted or you click this, um, what's going to happen is the HTML is going to sorry, grab all these values, turn it into a little object, and then send it to the server. Okay, and then you can access it this way in the backend. Okay, so let's assume we already have this done with password, username, and email. Okay, so I'll leave this here in comments so I can actually build my code. Let's get rid of you and you. Okay, so let's just say we had this already set up. Maybe missing a slash here, but that's okay. Okay. Then the one piece of information we're going to need, actually, let me uncomment this so I have autofill. Whoops. Is another HTML attribute is the encoding type, which is you're going to set to, oops, not equal that, equals x dot www.form dot URL encoded, right? Which is going to tell kind of how it's going to tell the browser how it should kind of build, at least what kind of data is being sent to the server. So you guys are going to need to send this for you guys. You're going to need to set this for your forms going forward. All right, so let me make sure I have the right parameter type set for this. Let me look at my form attribute on my Scratchpad here. This is the login. Crazy stuff. Form. Yeah, ink type. Oh, no capital T. Sorry. Yeah. So this is what you do, and this will send the form and the URL. It'll be URL encoded, just like get parameters, but nonetheless, you need to set this for your forms for you guys' front end. So let's assume we have this done already, and we're just going to write our route based off of this. Okay. So what's going to happen is we need to store all these values. And if you want to see this, you can do console.log request.body, and it will show you the object that we're going to access. If you like, I'll just leave that here. Okay, so we'll do let username equals request.body dot username. Okay, let we'll do email equals request.body email. Then let password equals request.body password. Now, the next thing you should do before we actually make the user is validate these. Do not assume just because you validate in the front end that the data you got is good. It's easy to remove validation. I showed this in class like a couple weeks ago where I had an validation set on the front end and I just deleted it from the HTML and you can still send the data. So you should always double validate before you do anything else after this data. You should verify this data is good before actually sending it to your database. Okay. So what I'm going to have here is I'm going to write some base SQL so I can, let's assume, let's just say this, validate data, if bad, send back response. Since we're using a form, you're probably going to have to say, res.redirect, go to the login or registration page, right? So if the data is bad, we'll just send them to the registration page, okay? But we're not going to program that here. So we'll do the base SQL, and it's just going to be a string. I'm going to use single quotes for this. The reason why I'm using single quotes, that way I can use double quotes in the SQL same if I need to. So insert into users. Then we're going to give the column name. So username, email, password, and created. Now I think the column name is created. Let's make sure so we don't have an issues later. I don't want to waste my time looking for it. I could just do right click. Created, yeah, perfect. All right, so I just need these three and created. I don't need the other ones. Okay. Now for the values, this might look a little weird. I'm gonna put question mark, comma, question mark, comma, comma, now, just like that. Okay, so the username, the email, and the password are all going to be unknowns, and then created is going to be the now function that will be executed on the server. Okay, and the one thing you don't want to do with these statements, especially if you're building dynamic SQL, is do a bunch of concatenations where you do plus, you close this, plus plus, close this, and you do stuff like username. This does work. However, you're going to open yourself up to a bunch of trouble with SQL injection and running statements you shouldn't run. You guys want to read funny stories? You can Google John drop all tables, which is a way of sending data to a server to delete all tables of a database for people who don't validate their uh, uh, data. So always validate your data because someone can run a statement and John drop all tables and stuff like that, which is kind of a fun thing to delete all the tables in your database if you're not careful. Okay. So you should never just blindly concatenate variables into uh, your SQL statements, and you should never do it anyways with other methods. You should always safely escape them and stuff like that. Use the methods that are provided in the MySQL driver module, which is ours is MySQL2, to do this correctly. So what I'm going to use is they're the second parameter of the query function are a list of keys you can get to fill in these values, and we'll do all the safe work for you so we don't have to worry about it. So we'll do db.query, and then the first parameter is going to be my base SQL. The second parameter is going to be a list of values, which are going to be username, username, email, and password, right? It should be the same order you define the columns, okay? Then we'll do a dot then, and this will be results and fields. Okay, and then we'll do our fat arrow function, and then we'll do some work. Now, this succeeds, we need to figure out how. Now, since we don't get a bunch of rows back when you create a statements, we need a different way. But you do get back certain pieces of information. For instance, if you remember from the workbench, you notice that when we ran some of our statements, we have like one affected rows or one change row, stuff like that. Insert one rows affected. So there is a property in this result object which allows you to make sure that it succeeded. Now, the reason I'm doing this first is I want to protect this item over here, which is results dot affected rows. And what this will do is to make sure that this object first exists before I access one of its properties so it doesn't crash in all glory for me. Okay, so if it does, what we'll do is we'll do res.send user was made. And if it doesn't work, we'll do res.send user was not made or not made for some reason. Okay. And notice I'm not handling any errors, by the way, so this is very bad. But we'll just see what happens. Okay. So hopefully this all works. We will rerun this npm start. No errors. Now here comes the unfortunate part. Sending data to the server is going to be a little annoying, but I'm going to do it with curl. So this should be kind of a little nice to set up. So curl has a few options. -h sets headers. -x sets the method. -d does the data. Okay, so I'm going to do curl, and we're going to do some multiple lines so we can see it better. -h content type. Dash I think. Colon, and it's going to be application / x-ww-form URL encoded colon. Okay, or size double colon. Then I'm gonna do this, which is gonna allow me to write something on the next line, so I don't do this all in one line. So I'm gonna do -X post -D and a bunch of data. Now this is gonna be kind of weird how we're gonna set this up, but it's gonna be username equals Tony test. That's me. And email equals fake at mail.com. Oh, I gotta be careful with this because stuff already exists. Let's do this so we don't have any issues. Mail.com and password equals a bunch of stuff dot com, right? Let me make sure this actually exists as well. We'll do a bunch of numbers here because it's right. And then we'll do one more line, which is going to be the oh, we didn't put a D there. That's be unfortunate. Oh, I put an extra quote, didn't I? Yeah, I did. Sucky. I'm gonna finish the rest of this and then we'll fix it. So we'll do, and then the last piece we want to type is um. Okay, let's just fix it since I broke it. Don't need these inner quotes. Don't do these inner quotes. It's bad. Okay, that's what we want to see. And local host. Now we want to do the URL at or colon 3000 db test create user. I think it's capital, right? It's capital U. Okay, and if all goes well, we did this correctly. This should work. Okay, and user was made, right? And if you go to here, we got the browser. I print out the request object. This is the username, email, password, post database, db test create user, right? And we could verify it was made because the rows affected was positive, at least bigger than 1. If this was 0, this would be false, by the way. So we'll go to our database. We'll go to our users and select some users, and you'll see that the user I just made is there. Now, this was done from the front end, right? This was done with my curl object, okay? So if we do this, so basically with this parameter, this last command here, we were able to test my create user, which is nice because I don't even have to worry about my front end. So if you guys don't like doing front end, sometimes like me, usually it takes me 1/6 the time to write my front end, or it takes me 1/6 the time to write my back end compared to my front end code because I'm front end inhibited, I guess if you want to say nicely. So it takes me a while longer to set that up. So I like to test all my stuff through curl. You can also use Postman, which is probably a much better way to do this now. But I'll show Postman later. So you can do this with curl. We can test all of our functions and stuff like that. Right? If I run it again, it actually breaks. Now that's because if you go here, all these errors just fail in the glory because there's an error, unhandled promise rejection warning, error, duplicate entry, blah 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 blah. Okay. Now if you notice, we don't do any error checking in our statements. Okay, and this is why it doesn't return because it fails. So we'll have to cancel it myself. So node is still running. We're going to stop it. So now we have to do is take care of errors. Okay, so in this one, not this one, sorry. In these statements, it's easy because we have an error parameter. If error exists, we can just deal with the error. Now, in Express, you have to be very careful. We need to define an error router or an error function. So the last kind of middleware function you can add is app.use, and we'll add a function here. Notice I'm not going to give a path because we're going to give it to everybody. Okay, so middleware functions, or sorry, request functions have 3 parameters: request, response, and next. How Express knows that it's an error middleware is we're going to append an error parameter first, then do request, response, and then next. Okay, and this is how Express knows that this is an error middleware. And if there's no error, it's not ran. If there's an error detected, it'll run this function here. So we'll do res dot send, or we do res dot status 500. Whoops. We do res dot send something went wrong with yo DB. That's not be too cute, right? With your DB. Okay. And then it did because we have an error. Okay. Now, how do we get to this? Now, unfortunately, all regular errors are caught automatically by Express if you have this defined. However, these functions are not normal. Or is not this one? These DB functions, right? These are basically promises. They're asynchronous code, which means they're ran at some point later. And Express can't really catch these because your kind of call stack disappears when it comes to this. So it has no way of figuring it out. So in order for you to do this correctly, if you just do throw error, it doesn't really work. Your thing still crashes. You get all this text down here. What you're gonna have to do is call next error, which means you're gonna pass the error object to the next middleware function. Now, what this does is it expressed gets an error object as a parameter for the next function call. It knows there's an error, and it calls this function here. Okay, so that's how Express knows, at least that's how Express is going to handle um, errors in asynchronous functions. You must pass it to the next parameter. So we call next if you call next, you call the next function in the request pipeline. But if the parameter given to next is an error, Express will call its error middleware function. Okay, in a non-asynchronous uh, setup, you don't need to call next error. You can just do throw error and it'll work. But since this is an asynchronous function because it's a promise, you have to call next error. So we're going to drag this down to here. Now, what do we do here? We have no error parameter. The beauty of this promise is now what we can do is we can do dot catch error here. Whoops, that's Java syntax. And then we can do next error. What's cool about these catch blocks is this basically is called whenever a promise is rejected. So if there's any error executing this, it'll be rejected. This will be skipped, and we will run this error function. Now, this is just syntactic sugar. All this is doing, really, to be honest, if you were to look at it, if you don't use it, you would basically be doing dot then. This is not going to work, but because we should do then before catches. Null and then error here, right? The second parameter of the then function is basically an error function. Okay, so the first one is fulfilled. The second one is rejected, right? So in order for you to pass, I should take this off. In order for you to call the error function, you would do it like this. But this is kind of ugly. You will see this a lot in old code that uses callbacks, where the first parameter would be success, second parameter would be error. So you would just kind of I should wrap this in parentheses for some reason. I don't know why I did that. You would not basically specify a parameter for the first one when there was an error. You would basically leave it null and then give a function. Sorry, you wouldn't specify a parameter for an error. You give a reference to a function to be called when there is an error, right? And you ignore the success case. But this is kind of ugly, and I already messed it up anyways because I don't have the right syntax going here. This should not be like this. What this should really be like is this is the first parameter, this is the second parameter. This one should basically be like this. Yes, I should need this. Whoops. Like that. Oh, I gotta close that. There we go. Kind of like that. Okay. So we gotta close out this then clause. Let's see. That one's this one. That one's this one. This one's this one. All these parentheses go crazy, right? So that's kind of this. This is what catch blocks looks like if you don't use the syntax. But this is ugly, right? So yeah, it's how error prone it is. But that's what this catch block does. So any error that happens, you will get it. Now, if you do dot then, right, and dot then, you do not need multiple catch blocks. Catch blocks. If any of these then clauses fails or is rejected, this catch block is or this catch function is triggered. Okay, so you don't need to chain catches if you at least in the simple case. So if any of these chained promises are rejected, we will call the catch block. Okay, so these. So if this fails, we'll call this, and then I'm going to copy and paste this onto this promise. And if we do this, we get this, right? So if this promise fails, if this fails, we will call this block, and it would go to not this function down here. Okay, so that's how you guys are going to have to handle errors from asynchronous. Error handling is actually very powerful in Express. It's very primitive too. I shouldn't say it's powerful. It's powerful in the sense that you have many ways of doing it. But the reason why I'm saying it's powerful is by default, once you define this error middleware function, it catches all exceptions automatically for you, except for asynchronous code, right? And then to do the asynchronous code catch, you simply just um, add in the next error function, and it catches this as well. And normally, when you do this, you should probably send back some data or render an error page like GitHub does when the server's down. They render an error 405 page. I mean, a 500 page going forward. So hopefully this helped you guys setting up MySQL. You're not going to do this exactly like this in terms of where the routers are and stuff like that. You can do logic inside the routers, but at least I kind of showed you how to create a user and stuff like that. I'm not going to, at least not in this video, show you how to get from the front end, but we have it from here, right? So um, you can do it this way, at least. That way you can kind of test this out on your own. Okay, so I recommend you guys do this. And I always type app.user because I'm not paying attention going forward. Okay, let's see if I did this correctly. If the promise is rejected too soon, it's probably going to miss it altogether. Yeah, see, so it failed. Actually, it never got to it because it's unfortunate. My thing hung a little bit. So I'm missing something in that error handler. But if you notice, when I ran it, the route, it actually didn't do anything at all, unfortunately. Okay, there it goes. So it failed, right? The ignore this code up here. So let me clear this out and restart it. Oh no, I got out of my terminal. So if you notice it failed and I return with this something went wrong, and then I see it here in my thing, right? And I actually get the response from the server. It took a while for it to cancel out, but that's okay. Uh, we're not gonna be great on speed. But if you notice now, when my database fails, I get something went wrong, but my app doesn't crash, and I can easily handle it, return with 500, stuff like that, right? Without this, if you saw before, you get none of that. Okay, so keep this in mind. You guys are writing it. I hope this helps with the JavaScript side, um, in terms of setting up the routes and stuff like that, and working with the database going forward. Right. So I'll see you guys in the next video.